snow came down the valley like a verdict that winter, slow and unarguable, covering the fences, the roofs, the old arguments carved into the town's bones, and Elias Crow, age 30, stood outside his barn with his coat pulled tight, breath ghosting the air as if his body itself were trying to leave him, for 1 month earlier he had buried his wife beneath frozen earth after she died bringing their twin daughters into the world, and now every sound, the wind through warped boards, the far-off creak of a sign, the thin cries of newborns waiting inside the house, seemed to ask whether a man could remain standing when everything that once held him upright had been taken away, and as he watched the snow settle into the hoof-prints of a life he did not recognize anymore, he felt the sense that something unseen was already nearby, listening, waiting, and about to step forward. She ran through that same snow with no name anyone here knew yet, Rohi, age 20, an orphan whose breath tore from her chest as she clung to the mane of a stolen horse, fleeing a forced marriage meant to end an old dispute that had nothing to do with her heart and everything to do with the price of peace. Her hands numb, her thoughts splintered by fear as elders' voices echoed in her memory telling her that obedience was survival, even as her body argued otherwise, and when the horse stumbled near a lonely barn at the edge of a white-silenced homestead, she slid down into the drifts and dragged herself inside, hiding among hay and shadow with the quiet, desperate hope that morning might arrive without discovery, unaware that the man who owned this place was already learning how to live with ghosts, and that her breath in the dark was about to become one of them. Before dawn, Elias stepped into the barn because routine was all grief had left him, lantern light shaking as his hand shook, and he heard a sound that did not belong to cattle or wood or wind, a breath too careful to be an animal's, and when he lifted the lantern higher he saw her eyes first, wide and shining, her body coiled as if ready to break apart, snow melting into her hair and blood crusted along one knuckle, and in that suspended moment neither spoke because language would have been a kind of violence, and the lantern light made them both look like figures trapped inside a memory neither had agreed to share, and something ancient and tentative passed between them that asked not what should be done, but what could still be spared. He did not reach for a rope or raise his voice, and that alone confused her more than cruelty would have, because Elias set the lantern down, shrugged out of his coat, and placed it within her reach as if offering a bridge that might collapse under either of them, then stepped back and left the barn door ajar so the wind could carry his trust away if she chose to run, and Rohi watched him retreat with the caution of someone who had learned that kindness often arrived with conditions, yet as the snow thickened and sealed the world smaller, she stayed where she was, because sometimes survival feels like choosing the risk that does not shout, and that quiet choice began to alter both their night. The first cry of the twins cut through the cold like a thin blade, and Rohi startled at the sound, not knowing whether to hide or follow it, until Elias said, halting and bare, that his wife had died 1 month earlier giving them life, and that he had not yet learned how to answer their need without her, and when Rohi stepped inside the house and took one small body into her arms, the baby stilled as if recognizing a promise older than either of them, and Elias watched with a reverence that felt like prayer, because in the hush that followed he saw the shape of something he had lost beginning to form again, though he did not yet know what it would demand. Snow carries voices far, and it did not take long before the town noticed a woman who did not belong, whispers skating across Frost Creek that a widower should not shelter a native girl, that grief was no excuse for scandal, and Sheriff Amos Hale arrived with concern dressed as authority, reminding Elias that kindness could curdle into trouble, and Elias listened without offering explanation. His silence a small rebellion that unsettled the men who believed words were how order was kept, and as Rohi stood just inside the doorway with a baby at her shoulder, she felt the familiar weight of judgment settle again, wondering if this place would turn its back the same way as all the others. Nights passed slowly, stitched together by gestures rather than declarations, by shared bowls of stew and the way Elias left space for Rohi at the table as if she had always belonged there, by the songs she hummed under her breath while rocking the twins, and the way his hands learned the careful choreography of care by watching hers, and in the flicker of lamplight he noticed how she held sorrow without letting it define her posture, while she noticed how his grief softened when he allowed himself to be useful, and between them grew a connection quiet enough to survive the snow, but fragile enough to make both of them afraid to name it. One evening, while the wind worried the walls and the fire sank into a quieter glow, Rohi, aged 20, finally spoke of why she had run, her voice low and careful as if each word might fracture the fragile peace she had found, telling Elias Crow, aged 30, how she had been promised to a man she did not choose to heal a wound she did not make, how her life had been offered like a stitch in someone else's torn history, and Elias listened as if her story were something sacred being placed into his hands, not interrupting, not rushing to shield or solve, only letting her truth breathe between them, and as she spoke he felt a slow, aching heat build behind his ribs, the kind that comes when injustice meets love, and when she finally fell silent there was no vow spoken aloud, only the tightening of his jaw and the way his gaze softened, as if some decision had already taken root in him, deep and irreversible, though neither of them yet understood how completely it would alter the ground beneath their lives. Tracks appeared in the snow like an answer no one had prayed for, dark arcs cutting through the white at dawn, horses circling the homestead with quiet certainty, and Rohi's breath caught painfully in her chest as faces from her past emerged, stern, familiar, unyielding, carrying with them the weight of tradition and the cold assurance of retrieval, and Elias stepped outside without a weapon, without a word of warning, placing his body between Rohi and the men who had come to claim her as if instinct itself had moved him there, his stance unremarkable except for the way he did not shift or flinch, and in that stillness the snow seemed to pause midair, waiting to learn what kind of courage love could summon when stripped of violence. Voices rose, sharp and accusing, words flung like ice meant to bruise and break, yet Elias answered not with ownership or threat but with choice, saying she stayed because she wished to, because here she was not a debt, not a settlement, not a wound to be closed, and Rohi felt something long bent inside her slowly straighten as she stepped to his side instead of shrinking behind him, her nearness a declaration more powerful than any argument, and after a long, brittle silence her people turned away, not defeated, not victorious, leaving her freedom edged with grief and consequence, and when they were gone the snow fell harder, as if the world itself were trying to soften the sound of her quiet, shaking tears. Afterward, in the barn where she had once hidden among hay and fear, Elias rested his forehead gently against hers, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath and the tremor she could no longer hold back, yet still not crossing the final distance, and in that restraint lived a promise deeper than touch, that nothing here would ever be taken, that everything would be chosen, and Rohi's chest ached with a fragile, luminous hope she had never dared to carry before, because sometimes love does not arrive with grasping hands or urgent claims, but with patience, with presence, with the courage to wait, and that waiting felt more intimate than any embrace. When Elias finally spoke the words that had been shaping themselves in silence, he did not offer them as rescue or desperation, but as a trembling invitation shaped by honesty, saying that his children needed a mother and that he, in the quiet places of his grief, needed a partner to stand beside him, and Rohi looked at him as if weighing not the words but the care behind them, then answered without speech by placing her hand in his, her fingers warm against his calloused palm, the simple, deliberate weight of that contact shifting something fundamental in both their lives, because in that moment they were no longer surviving side by side but choosing one another, even as they both felt, like a distant ache, the certainty that the town would not allow such a choice to pass without demanding its price. Sheriff Hale returned soon after, his voice edged with the authority of men who confuse order with righteousness, delivering an ultimatum sharpened by public opinion, marriage or separation, as if love itself required permission to exist, and Elias accepted marriage without pause, his answer steady and unflinching, while Rohi searched his face for any sign that she had become a solution instead of a desire. finding instead the same patience that had once left a barn door open and trusted her not to be afraid, and though fear tightened her throat and old memories whispered of vows used as cages, she chose trust again, because a promise freely entered carries a different weight than a chain, even when both are forged beneath winter skies. The wedding took place beneath falling snow, hushed and unadorned, the world reduced to white and breath and the quiet courage of two people standing close, Rohi wearing the beads of her people against her heart and the simple cloth of frontier life at her shoulders, Elias bareheaded as if to meet both sky and judgment without disguise, and their vows spoke not of ownership but of partnership, of choosing each other each morning the way one chooses to stand firm against a storm, and when they kissed it was slow and reverent, a meeting of mouths that carried gratitude, longing, and relief, sealing not possession but shared ground, while the snow continued its patient descent, as if the world itself were bearing witness and offering its blessing by refusing to stop. Marriage did not erase their wounds, but it taught them how to touch them gently without fear, how to tend them together as one might tend a fragile flame in winter, shielding it with cupped hands and patience, and they learned intimacy not through urgency but through shared labor and unguarded laughter, through the quiet miracle of small triumphs that belonged only to them, and in the evenings when the twins finally slept, Elias would trace the lines of Rohi's hands as if memorizing a language written long before they met, kissing her knuckles with a reverence that made her chest ache, while she discovered, slowly and with wonder, that safety could live beside desire, that passion did not have to demand but could ask, and that joy, when it is real, often speaks in whispers rather than shouts. Spring threatened but never quite arrived, lingering at the edge of the world like a promise still deciding whether to keep itself, and the town's hard edges softened as people learned that love, once rooted, is stubborn and difficult to dislodge, and Elias watched Rohi move through the snow with a confidence born not of defiance but of belonging, her laughter warming the air. The barn that had once hidden her fear now sheltering a family shaped not by convenience or mercy but by deliberate choice, and in that sight he understood that survival had quietly deepened into devotion, a love steady enough to face whatever seasons might come, even as the future stretched before them as wide and white as the land itself. And so, as the snow continues to fall in memory long after the years have turned and the world has moved on, I tell you this not as a story of rescue but of recognition, that dignity can be reclaimed without spectacle and love can be chosen even when the world insists on cruelty, and if you listen closely you might hear it too, the soft, enduring sound of two hearts standing together against the cold, inviting you to believe that sometimes the bravest, most romantic thing a soul can do is open a door, leave it unbarred, and trust that love will know when to step inside.